let's clarify the level of complexity of the content. And that's kind of feeding into something we're going to talk about where I mentioned kind of this path that I think Ottawa found themselves launched in, or I should say the U.S. end of course history group found themselves from the experience they went through. I think the other thing we need to consider is the reasonableness of it. So, this brings about an interesting point. We talked a lot about assessment, right? What is the number of items on a target? All right, so this is an interesting slide, I think, to think through. All right, so what do those items look like over those targets? All right, so the first part here, what this is speaking to is really what I think is not utilized for lack of question items, right? So when you look at MEEP results, when you look at any data results, you want to know the number of questions that were given around that specific learning target or standard, whatever it may be. Obviously, if it's one, it's a 50-50 shot, right? So if the data comes back and says, wow, the kids were 50% proficient, it could have been a guess based on the question because it was only one item. So what that first bullet item is saying, let's look at 3. Obviously 5 is better. We get into the psychometrician, the BA research and all that, or sorry, the assessment research. Obviously the more the better because of the average and it gives the kid a chance to really show what they know. But I think 3 is pretty reasonable, probably above reasonable, which is why it doesn't exist currently on MEEP and other things. Some have 3, some have 1, and you got to look at that, and that's something we talk to. The next piece then is, okay, and this is where Smarter Balanced, I think, really has it. I have a Smarter Balanced, actually, I didn't even think about it, but I do have a Smarter Balanced blueprint. I didn't even realize that's what it was called. But I do have a Smarter Balanced blueprint, and it's really interesting how they break it down. Because this whole concept of an adaptive question is very mind-bending in what it gets at. And so my example of a question might be, the child would be given a paragraph. The question stem to that might be, which of the following sentences in the paragraph determine the main idea? Well, you know, based on the learning, my instinct, I should say, would be I would look first at the beginning sentence of the paragraph, or I'd look at the ending sentence of the paragraph to see where the claim's going to be. That makes logical sense. I might have each sentence of the paragraph then as an option. I have to choose one. Based on my choice, I'm going to actually know more about what that child's thinking is than just if they can find the main idea. It's going to give me insight to if they understand structure as well, possibly, right? And so I guess what I'm getting at is that question will assess if a student can determine main idea. Because let's say it is the last sentence of the paragraph. If they choose the last sentence, then they got it, so I know they understand main idea. But what if the student were to have chosen, if given one of the distractors, as the middle sentence in the paragraph? What does that tell you about the student? First of all, yeah, they don't know the main idea. But what else does it tell you? Because why do I know that more than the structure? So all of a sudden, the answer to that question is now twofold. Yes, can they or can't they identify the main idea? But if they're picking the middle sentence, there's probably a structural concern as well, because they probably don't understand that a main idea is typically at the beginning or the end. So all of a sudden, it's twofold. And that's kind of the adaptive kind of process that these Smarter Balanced questions lean towards. And I think that's what this speaks to here, to say, over those targets, you may not be able to have 3 items for every single target, but one particular item might give insight to 2 targets at the same time. And I think that works especially well sometimes in social studies, especially the way that they're written. There's overlap in where the answer to one question might provide insight to what a person understands about another component in history. Does that make sense? Make sure the levels of complexity are appropriate for that target. So make sure whatever it is you expect the student to produce for an answer, your instruction has to match that, but then the question also has to match that. So what layer of understanding do the kids have to go? And so the level of complexity is not only important in how the question's written, but in the target that's determined, and then the instruction given, which again goes back to what we talked about earlier to say, well, I felt that my question was DOK 2, but based on the student performance, it seemed to be DOK 3 or more. Carol was mentioning that even recall is a struggle. And so what is it we can do to help build capacity for kids to even engage in basic recall questions to help that with that thinking? Appropriate distribution of items over levels of complexity. So in other words, you don't want to give them all DOK 4 and watch them all just sit and twitch. All right, so professional judgment comes into play, yes. And the more that we practice this, the more that we get into these repetitions, the more we'll get more comfortable in it. We're building kind of a community in this group. I can already see that working, and that's great. But it's going to move us into this piece. And so what we're going to do then is I know I keep hyping it, the conversation around the blueprint. But what I want to do is I want to dig into an article that I think is going to continue some of the thinking I just started. But it's not going to be around, okay, this is what the MAC says, okay, this is what Mark Raffler is trying to interpret from the MAC and bring out, well, I shouldn't say just Mark Raffler, but our Esteba group. But I'm going to pull something out of here that really speaks to me out of this Essential Questions book that I mentioned. It's just 2 pages. And what I'd like you to do is consider these 2 questions. So what are ways that you see this text connecting to the work we are doing in this this question? So as you read this, I want you to make connections from this article to this work that we're doing. And I give you the text sets to consider. We've got that Ocean handout, we've got the MAC video, you've got the other DOK handout, and you have the MAC question item rubric handout. Okay? Use those and see if you can find connections between what this article speaks to and what we've been going through in this course. And I want to see what your thoughts are. And if you had something outside of maybe the connection, you just had something that really jumps out at you, feel free to share that as well. But I'm going to give us it probably will be about 10 minutes, and I'll kind of check in just based on how I see. But I'm going to pass this out, mark the text up, make those connections. I'll leave the question up here. But I just want you to dive into this. And again, this is pulled out of this Essential Questions by Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins. And it's chapter 2. It's the end of chapter 2. So I'm going to pass it out. I'd like you to dive into it, mark the text up, and consider it from this angle. Or if you have other thoughts, I by all means encourage you to share those as well. All right?